Greetings, we are in Senior English A, and our objective now for the hour is to work with three what we will call Anglo-Saxon poems. Now, we have already worked with Beowulf, and out of your textbook, and you should be on page 21 and following of your hymnal, we've already seen a poem that we will call a great Anglo-Saxon poem. Okay? The poem Beowulf. Your hymnal will place before that text these classic poems from what's called the Exeter book. Do you see that on page 19? I'm working off of the assumption you've already read page 19 and you took a few notes. Again, before you read, I always recommend that you let your hymnal help you know what you're looking at. These three poems, the Seafarer, the Wanderer, the Wife's Lament, we call works of that early time period, that Anglo-Saxon time period. And all three of these poems share certain things in common. Let's list several of those for our notes, just so we can start to get a sense of what it is we're looking at. Okay? These people that we will call these Anglo-Saxons are going to celebrate a time that's kind of close to them, all right, even kind of their time, when everyone survived on water. Okay? They sailed on ships. If you think Vikings at all, the very first thing you should think of is boatcraft. They were brilliant seamen. They knew how to build ships. They knew how to sail in those ships across really nasty cold water. And they were survivors in battles. But we should point out, it's a lonely existence. It's a lonely existence. When you get in a boat and you sail far away, not too many people can go with you. And you normally are going to leave, this is key for your notes, home. You're going to leave people who you love. These poems, just like Beowulf, are predominantly male, M-A-L-E, poems. They are poems by men for men. Notice in the entire poem Beowulf that you read, virtually no mention of women of any kind, right? They're not even talked about. They're not even referenced, right? For example, as one of my students once asked me, does Beowulf have a girl? See, that's a great question. We know that at the end of his life, he says he doesn't have a son, which seems to suggest he never got married and had children. See, okay, that says something about Beowulf right there within the Anglo-Saxon culture, right? In our poems, we're going to have poems, two of them will be about men who are on the ocean, in a boat, alone. But I want to say something that helps you as well for your notes, and that is this. At a very early point in English literature, we're already playing the metaphor game. The what game? The metaphor game. M-E-T-A-P-H-O-R. Metaphor. One thing stands for something else. That's all it means. Write it down. One thing represents something else. Okay? And very quickly, you will see, when you listen to these poems read out loud, that being alone on a boat in the middle of the ocean is kind of like living a life. Right? Struggles, challenges, the threat of death, constantly the threat of death, right? Think about it. Anglo-Saxons don't have hospitals. Think about what I just said. They don't have hospitals. They don't have what we would think of today as doctors. You die from a little tiny nick by a sword, for example, because infection sets in, because they got no penicillin. You die very quickly. Women die in childbirth all the time. Men will die just walking out to get water or going off to battle and still being wounded. Being wounded, you're going to usually die. So it's a very rough, let's put it in our notes this way, it's a very rough, a very tough existence. It's not an easy world that they live in. So we've got two poems, the Seafarer and the Wanderer, which not only lament but celebrate this kind of life. And, let's point out, these are profoundly religious poems that will say It's very hard to get through life without a belief in the meaning of that life, some kind of purpose, some kind of destiny. Okay? And to that degree, these poems also serve as, are you ready for this term? Moral propaedeutics. Now, a propaedeutic is simply a instruction for good moral behavior, teaching, didactic, right? That is to say, the final lines of Beowulf 2. Did you write that down? Remember that? The final lines of Beowulf 2, where Hrothgar says to Beowulf what? Beware of pride. See, now that's not just an admonition to Beowulf and to the soldiers standing there. That's a poet saying to all would-be readers and listeners of the poem, watch out, beware of pride. And so we're going to see some similar kinds of moral propaedeutics, lessons to be learned from these texts that early Anglo-Saxon, especially men, were to understand. The third poem we'll look at, Wife's Lament, is even more fascinating. This is a woman's voice who has been left behind. Here's the problem. These guys would get in boats and sail away. Their chances of coming back, not real high. What happens if they don't come back? Then what happens to the woman left behind? This is a tough one. And in the Wife's Lament, we're going to hear the challenges that she will speak of. Where does she live? What does she do? In a patriarchal world, women do what they're told by men. But the challenge is what happens when the woman no longer has a man? She might be looked at as completely useless. She might be thought of as totally a loser. She might think of herself as a loser because the only way she could be anything is to have her man. But her man is gone. Now what does she do? Go out and find another man? Yeah, but the problem with that is what happens if he comes back? See, we know the story of the Odyssey and Penelope, and Odysseus has gone 20 years. Waiting. But wait a minute, there's a problem. Odysseus was a king and he left his queen with lots and lots of stuff. So she had something to eat. What happens if you're just a lowly wife of a lowly soldier? Well, once he's gone, for example, for 3 months, now what are you going to eat? Where are you going to go to get some food? Who's going to take care of you? Where are you going to live? You can see the problems. A lament is a sad song. So the wife's lament, you can put it in your notes real quickly already, is a sad song. Let's now go to a listening of these 3 texts, okay? And so we'll listen to each one of these. We have a professional reader reading for us. What you want to do is simply follow along, paying close attention to the language of the poem itself. As you listen, you might want to write down a few notes as well about what is really being said here about life. I will say that again. This is an easy way to write down about these poems. What are the major messages about life that we learn? I'll give you hints. Life is hard. Life is short. Life is difficult to get meaning. And life ultimately has to be defined in the experience of pain and suffering. Right? All right, here we go. We will begin with Seafarer as the first of our 3 poems.
Seafarer, from the Exeter book, Anonymous.
When are people most alone? The 3 poems you will read from the Exeter book, The Seafarer, The Wanderer, and The Wife's Lament, portray characters who, for one reason or another, feel painfully isolated. As you read, consider what allows their experiences to resonate even today.
This tale is true and mine. It tells how the sea took me, swept me back and forth in sorrow and fear and pain, showed me suffering in 100 ships, in 1,000 ports, and in me. It tells of smashing surf when I sweated in the cold of an anxious watch, perched in the bow as it dashed under cliffs. My feet were cast in icy bands, bound with frost, with frozen chains, and hardship groaned around my heart. Hunger tore at my sea-weary soul. No man sheltered on the quiet fairness of earth can feel how wretched I was, drifting through winter on an ice-cold sea, whirled in sorrow, alone in a world blown clear of love, hung with icicles. The hailstorms flew. The only sound was the roaring sea, the freezing waves. The song of the swan might serve for pleasure, the cry of the seafowl, the death noise of birds instead of laughter, the mewing of gulls instead of mead. Storms beat on the rocky cliffs and were echoed by icy feathered terns and the eagle's screams. No kinsman could offer comfort there to a soul left drowning in desolation. And who could believe, knowing but the passion of cities, swelled proud with wine and no taste of misfortune, how often, how wearily I put myself back on the paths of the sea. Night would blacken. It would snow from the north. Frost bound the earth and hail would fall, the coldest seas. And how my heart would begin to beat, knowing once more the salt waves tossing and the towering sea. The time for journeys would come, and my soul called me eagerly out, sent me over the horizon, seeking foreigners' homes. But there isn't a man on earth so proud, so born to greatness, so bold with his youth, grown so brave, or so graced by God, that he feels no fear as the sails unfurl, wondering what fate has willed and will do. No harps ring in his heart, no rewards, no passion for women, no worldly pleasures, nothing. Only the oceans heave. But longing wraps itself around him. Orchards blossom, the towns bloom. Fields grow lovely as the world springs fresh. And all these admonish that willing mind leaping to journeys, always set in thoughts traveling on a quickening time. So the summer sentinel, the cuckoo, sings in his murmuring voice, and our hearts mourn as he urges. Who could understand, in ignorant ears, what we others suffer as the paths of exile stretch endlessly on? And yet my heart wanders away. My soul roams with the sea, the whale's home, wandering to the widest corners of the world, returning ravenous with desire, flying solitary, screaming, exciting me to the open ocean, breaking oaths on the curb of a wave. Thus the joys of God are fervent with life, where life itself fades quickly into the earth. The wealth of the world neither reaches to heaven nor remains. No man has ever faced the dawn certain which of fate's three threats would fall, illness or age, or an enemy's sword snatching the life from his soul. The praise the living pour on the dead flowers from reputation. Plant an earthly life of profit reaped even from hatred and rancor, of bravery flung in the devil's face, and death can only bring you earthly praise, and a song to celebrate a place with the angels, life eternally blessed in the hosts of heaven. The days are gone when the kingdoms of earth flourished in glory. Now there are no rulers, no emperors, no givers of gold as once there were, when wonderful things were worked among them, and they lived in lordly magnificence. Those powers have vanished, those pleasures are dead. The weakest survives, and the world continues, kept spinning by toil. All glory is tarnished. The world's honor ages and shrinks, bent like the men who mold it. Their faces blanch as time advances. Their beards wither, and they mourn the memory of friends, the sons of princes sown in the dust. The soul, stripped of its flesh, knows nothing of sweetness or sour, feels no pain, bends neither its hand nor its brain. A brother opens his palms and pours down gold on his kinsman's grave, strewing his coffin with treasures intended for heaven. But nothing golden shakes the wrath of God for a soul overflowing with sin, and nothing hidden on earth rises to heaven. We all fear God. He turns the earth. He set it swinging firmly in space, gave life to the world and light to the sky. Death leaps at the fools who forget their God. He who lives humbly has angels from heaven to carry him courage and strength and belief. A man must conquer pride, not kill it, be firm with his fellows, chaste for himself, treat all the world as the world deserves, with love or with hate, but never with harm. Though an enemy seek to scorch him in hell, or set the flames of a funeral pyre under his lord. Fate is stronger and God mightier than any man's mind. Our thoughts should turn to where our home is, consider the ways of coming there, then strive for sure permission for us to rise to that eternal joy, that life born in the love of God and the hope of heaven. Praise the holy grace of He who honored us, eternal, unchanging Creator of earth. Amen.
All right, you should now have already written down a couple of observations about the challenges of life as discussed in Seafarer. We now go to Wanderer. Let's take a look at this one, a similar kind of poem. You'll see lots of similarities between these two poems at 3a, right?
The Wanderer, from the Exeter Book, Anonymous. This lonely traveler longs for grace, for the mercy of God. Grief hangs on his heart and follows the frost-cold foam that cuts in the sea, sailing endlessly, aimlessly, in exile. Fate has opened a single port, memory. He sees his kinsmen slaughtered again and cries, "I've drunk too many lonely dawns, gray with morning." Once there were men to whom my heart could hurry, out without the London. They're long since dead. My heart is closed on itself, quietly learning that silence is noble, and sorrow nothing but speech can cure. Sadness has never driven sadness off. Fate blows hardest on a bleeding heart. So those who thirst for glory smother secret weakness and longing, neither weep nor sigh nor listen to the sickness of their souls. So I, lost and homeless, forced to flee the darkness that fell on the earth and my Lord. Leaving everything, weary with winter, I wandered out in the frozen waves, hoping to find a place, a people, a Lord to replace my lost ones. No one knew me, no. No one offered comfort, allowed me feasting or joy. How cruel a journey I've traveled, sharing my private sorrow alone in exile in every land, could only be told by telling my footsteps. For who can hear, friendless and poor, and know what I've known since the long cheerful nights when, young and yearning, with my Lord I had feasted most welcome of all. That warmth is dead. He only knows who needs his Lord as I do, eager for long missing leave. He only knows who never sleeps without the deepest dreams of longing. Sometimes it seems I see my Lord, kiss and embrace him, bend my hands and head to his knee, kneeling as though he still sat in throne, ruling his things. And I open my eyes, embracing the air, and see the brown sea billows heave, see the seabirds bathe, spreading their white feathered wings, watch the frost and the hail and the snow. And heavy in heart I long for my Lord, alone and unloved. Sometimes it seems I see my kin and greet them gladly, give them welcome, the best of friends. They fade away, swimming soundlessly out of sight, leaving nothing. How loathsome become the frozen waves to a weary heart. In this brief world I cannot wonder that my mind is set melancholy, because I never forget the fate of men, robbed of their riches, suddenly looted by death, the doom of earth, sent to us all by every rising sun. Wisdom is slow and comes but late. He who has it is patient. He cannot be hasty to hate or speak. He must be bold and yet not blind, nor even too craven, complacent, or covetous, nor ready to gloat before he wins glory.
Notice these propaedeutics.
Instructional. Flings his boasts hotly to the heavens, heeding his spleen and not the better boldness of knowledge. What knowing man knows not the ghostly, waste-like end of worldly wealth? See, already the wreckage is there. The wind-swept walls stand far and wide. The storm-beaten blocks besmeared with frost, the mead halls crumbled, the monarchs thrown down and stripped of their pleasures. The proudest of warriors now lie by the wall, some of them war-destroyed, some the monstrous seabird bore over the ocean. To some the old wolf dealt out death, and for some dejected followers fashioned an earth-cave coffin. Thus the Maker of men lays waste this earth, crushing our callow earth, and the work of old giants stands withered and still. He who these ruins rightly sees, and deeply considers this dark twisted life, who sagely remembers the endless slaughters of the bloody past, is bound to proclaim, where is the war steed? Where is the warrior? Where is his warlord? Where now the feasting places? Where now the mead hall pleasures? Alas, bright cup, alas, brave knight, alas, you glorious princes, all gone, lost in the night, as you never have lived. And all that survives you, the serpentine wall, wondrously high, worked in strange ways. Mighty spears have slain these men, greedy weapons have framed their fall. These rocky slopes are beaten by storms, this earth pinned down by driving snow, by the horror of winter, smothering warmth in the shadows of night. And the north angrily hurls its hailstorms at our helpless heads. Everything earthly is evilly born, firmly clutched by a fickle fate. Fortune vanishes, friendship vanishes, man is fleeting, woman is fleeting, and all this earth rolls into emptiness. So says the sage in his heart, sitting alone with his thought. It's good to guard your faith, nor let your grief come forth until it cannot call for help, nor help but heed the path you've placed before you. It's good to find your grace in God, the heavenly rock where rests our every hope.
Okay, now finally to the third and last of our poems, The Wife's Lament. Again, let me just emphasize, while we're working with these poems, don't just listen. Hello? You are doing that in kindergarten. Somebody could read to you and you just listen. That is not this project. I'm helping you learn how to read by asking that you literally follow, word by word, the reading. If our reader goes too fast for you, we've got issues with your speed modulation, your reading, and we've got to help you. Okay? Question?
That last story was a completely different translation.
Good. So we might have a different translator at play, and so that's even more interesting, right? To kind of look and see. That would even require a closer kind of reading, but it wouldn't be, word for word. It would kind of be looking at the line. How did the translator play that game? Let's take a look at our final reading now, Wife's Lament. Let's see if it's something similar. Was it a verbatim reading of the first one, though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's take a look now at Wife's Lament. We'll see what we got here. This is a short one.
The Wife's Lament. I make this song about me full sadly, my own wayfaring. I, a woman, tell what griefs I had since I grew up new or old, never more than now. Ever I know the dark of my exile. First my Lord went out away from his people, over the wave tumult. I grieved each dawn, wondered where my Lord, my first on earth, might be. Then I went forth, a friendless exile, to seek service in my sorrow's noon. My man's kinsmen began to plot by darkened thought, to divide us two, so we most widely in the world's kingdom lived wretchedly, and I suffered longing. My Lord commanded me to move my dwelling here. I had few loved ones in this land or faithful friends. For this my heart grieves, that I should find a man well matched to me, hard of fortune, mournful of mind, hiding his mood, thinking of murder. Blithe was our bearing. Often we vowed that but death alone would part us two, not else. But this is turned round now, as if it never were our friendship. I must far and near bear the anger of my beloved. The man sent me out to live in the woods, under an oak tree, in this den in the earth. Ancient this earth hall. I am all longing. The valleys are dark, the hills high, the yard overgrown, bitter with briars, a joyless dwelling. Full oft, the lack of my Lord seizes me cruelly here. Friends there are on earth, living, beloved, lying in bed, while I at dawn am walking alone under the oak tree through these earth halls. There I may sit the summer-long day. There I can weep over my exile, my many hardships. Hence I may not rest from this care of heart, which belongs to me ever, nor all this longing that has caught me in this life. May that young man be sad-minded always, hard his heart's thought, while he must wear a blithe bearing with care in the breast, a crowd of sorrows. May on himself depend all his world's joy. Be he outlawed far in a strange folk-land, that my beloved sits under a rocky cliff, rimed with frost, a lord dreary in spirit, drenched with water, in a ruined hall. My lord endures much care of mine. He remembers too often a happier dwelling. Woe be to them that for a loved one must wait in longing.
All right, let's finish up now with some general observations about all three of these texts. I want to go to the word exile in the third poem. Did you see that word? What does that word mean to you? Jot down a definition of the word exile. What does it mean, exile? Does anyone want to throw out a definition for us? What does that mean? Some of you maybe heard that word before. How about it, Oz? What's an exile? You heard this word? Exile. Say it out loud.
Not allowed.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. Displacement, not allowed. You're somehow outside, right? If you're an exile, you don't get to be a part, right? The question will often be, when do you feel most alone? When do you feel most exiled? Can you appreciate at 3B now an observation that a student once said, there's a difference to me between being alone and being lonely. That's interesting. Being alone and being lonely. She said, I can be in an entire group of people. I'm not alone, but I can still be lonely. How is that possible? How can you be lonely if you're in the middle of a whole bunch of people?
He's not involved.
Right, we're talking about loneliness has to do with the way you think, the way you feel, right? It's got nothing to do with the geography of physical bodies around you, correct? Notice in our poems, there's this tension between being alone and being lonely. Notice in the second poem, right, The Wanderer, that memory, remembering the old days, makes the speaker of the poem happy or sad? Sad. Why? Everything's changing. Jot down in 3B on one of these three. Why do you think we teach this poem, these sets of poems, to seniors who will soon graduate and have to move on with their life and go do other things? It's fairly self-evident, huh? Seniors will often report they understand the feeling of a different kind of loneliness in their senior year. It's a fear of the future, an anxiety about what's coming next, an uncertainty, we might say, right? And the only thing you can do is to kind of hope that you learn something from your previous mistakes and experiences going forward, right? And in the process, try to find your way. Notice the one poem said, back home. One's thoughts should turn to home, which is a really strange thing to think. You only have a few more days to live at home, right? Our foreign exchange student made a very courageous choice. Think of it. He left home, and he came to a completely foreign place. And yet all of us will have this experience soon as we graduate and get ready to move on to other places, other experiences. Do you think you'll think of home different in a few years? Chances are, yeah, maybe, right? As we start thinking about leaving, right? What is the difference between a house and a home? It's another question you might jot down. What is the difference between being in a place and feeling you belong in that place, right? It's not always the same thing. All right, there you go. Anglo-Saxon poetry.